All set, Jeff?
All right. I'm Jeff Anderson, and I am privileged to stand here today with several advocates and several survivors, and each devoted to the protection of children. Today, I will be introducing first Michael Johnson, and then introducing the others that need to speak to the truth that needs to be known. And that truth is that kids in the Boy Scouts of America, Scouting USA, are not safe. And there really is nobody that can speak to that more powerfully than Michael Johnson. Why so? 10.5 years ago, after almost 3 decades as a detective in child sexual abuse and in law enforcement, and all the experience he brought to bear in that work, the Boy Scouts of America hired him as their Director of Youth Protection. The Boy Scouts of America were then under heat and pressure through litigation brought by courageous survivors across this country, and they're under pressure to disclose their files, their secrets, and they knew they had to do something more given that pressure. And they hired him as the Director of Youth Protection. And when they did, he went to work with and for them, and he pushed them hard. And in the early years, they began to implement the things that he began to say have to be done now. However, they began to push back on him because their motivations were to preserve both reputation and the brand of Boy Scouts of America being safe when they weren't. After almost 10.5 years as the Director of Youth Protection, and after he had pushed them to do the right thing and do it in the right way, and they refused and denied and pushed him out and pushed him back and continued to push him back, he knew the harder you pushed, the harder they pushed. And as a result, they pushed him out. He knew that the truth had to be told and it had to be known. And he's here today to share that truth. And he's here today to let folks know kids are not safe in the Boy Scouts of America. And Michael Johnson, I'd like you to step forward and share with us why it is so, and how you know it to be, and then share with us the call to action, which includes a letter that he sent to Congress that is posted on our website. Michael Johnson.
Jeff, thank you very much. Thank you for getting my back, sir. My name is Michael Johnson. I'm a father, a son, and former Director of Youth Protection with the Boy Scouts of America. And the truth be told, I have got to share with something that's been on my heart and a major concern of mine in my final years at the Boy Scouts of America, as well as after my departure, and is more clearly true. When I asked the question, is the Boy Scouts of America safe for kids? And that question was asked of me both internally while I was at the organization, as well as multiple times since I've left the organization in conversations with parents, mothers, and families and other youth servant organizations, the truth of the matter and the truth that I said at the time was, it's not. Boy Scouts of America is not safe for kids. It is safer, but it's not safe for kids. I stand here today to say something that this organization, Scouts executive leadership, does not want me to say, and that is that statement. To you survivors, and I feel strongly about speaking directly to you. I've had the opportunity to meet numerous of you over the years while I was at Boy Scouts and since I've left. I've heard your experiences. I don't use the term story. Especially you Eagle Scouts. Especially you Eagle Scouts who put up with continued sexual abuse. And I know exactly what sexual abuse looks like. Not just the term, the phrase, but the activity that you had to put up with to gain your equal. And then the Scouts that left Scouting because they didn't want to put up with their sexual abuse, continued sexual abuse. So this is for each and every single one of you, because I never forgot you while I was there, and I will never forget you and your experiences. We failed you. I failed you. Not only did you experience sexual abuse, but you were and continue to be marginalized within the Scouts organization. Your experiences and level of suffering is incomprehensible. And I know this. I hear you. I have always heard you. And your experiences have always been at the forefront of my efforts. So I stand here today, bolstered by your experiences, to tell the truth. During my time at the Boy Scouts of America, I did everything within my power to make Scouting safe for every Scout, no matter the Scout's gender or sexual identity. Each Scout deserved and still deserves a Scouting experience that is safe and safe from sexual abuse. It is not. I tried, but could not make the needed changes within the organization. I was met with opposition, pushback, and denial. I knew that the only thing I could do to honor you survivors' experiences and to force the needed change was to stand here and make public what I know. Scouting is a high-risk organization. I repeat, Scouting and its programs are a high-risk organization. And although I was able to implement many new policies and procedures and training that I'm very proud of, to move the Scouting program into a much safer place, the Boy Scouts continue to fail to meet an acceptable standard of care for a high-risk organization that they are. This is a basic concept that Scouts executive leadership continues to fail to understand. Oh, and they have been told. They've been told by me, and they have been told by others. The Scouts are not a standard youth serving organization. Scouting is a high-risk youth serving organization. Some of the examples, and there are numerous, are the activities like long overnight Scouting trips staffed by untrained and unscreened volunteers, mixing of boys of varying ages, and a lack of appropriate adult supervision of these boys in their activities. A culture of secrecy within Scouting programs that creates access and opportunity to very core elements for grooming type sexual behavior to occur. A culture of secrecy within some charting organizations or churches, poor screening that has allowed Scouting to admit known predators as Scout leaders and other individuals that just hang around Scouting. And many of those known predators are working and camping with Scouts to this day. One of the most dangerous policies, one that I sought to address the issue of individuals participating in scouting that aren't screened, that aren't vetted, that aren't registered. And the response I got back from national leadership was the 72-hour rule, a policy that states if an overnight trip lasts longer than 72 hours, anyone over the age of 18 can accompany the scout troop, whether it be boys or girls. And I will say this policy was created about the time that we admitted girls, which anybody who's an expert in the field knows is at higher risk of experiencing sexual abuse. Keep in mind, this means that if the trip doesn't last as long as 72 hours, that there's really no need for the individuals to be screened. An area not often discussed, and I haven't heard discussed in some of the discussions I've heard recently, is the risk to youth by other youth. More than or up to 50% of the youth sexually abused in scouting are abused by other scouts in the program. While I was able to implement policies that did not allow older youth to share tents with younger youth, there was no screening process that identified scouts who are already offenders or who exhibited behaviors that indicate the scout could be a risk to other youth. During my time at Scouts BSA, I was excluded from important key meetings that discussed policy, training, discussions surrounding child sexual abuse prevention, and worked with experts. And yes, I was the director of youth protection. I was forced to leave scouting, although I was willing to stay and continue to make the fight, to make the needed changes. I knew that I was the only one that was going to do that. I had support from other lower level staff people, if I may, but I was no longer being listened to. At that time, Scouts BSA executive leadership asked me to sign a non-disclosure, non-disparagement agreement in exchange for a cash reward. I could not sign that agreement. I could not live with myself knowing that I could not tell the truth when and where I needed to tell the truth. It was never any intent of mine to disparage, by my definition of disparage, an organization that I think is important for our country. Simply put, I cannot live with myself if I do not speak out about the danger, the clear and present danger that scouting presents. And I don't see the path forward to making it safer as things are going now. Again, I apologize for every survivor who has been villainized by the Scouts organization, both by being disrespected, disbelieved regarding your experiences. You have earned the right to know the truth, and I'm willing to tell you the truth. It is time for real change in the Boy Scouts of America, or Scouts BSA. For each of you survivors, for every current and future scout, boys and girls. That is why I asked members of Congress to do or enforce the following. Number one, immediate congressional hearings and investigation into the scope and the breadth of child sexual abuse, predatory grooming, and the cover-up of crimes against children in the Boy Scouts of America, or Scouts BSA. Number two, congressional review of the misuse of the U.S. Bankruptcy Code to avoid the exposure of sex crimes and the BSA role in them. Number three, Congress must revise the Scouting Federal Charter to make it safe for all youth participating in the program. Number four, Scouts must work with independent, non-scouting researchers and experts to conduct a baseline study to assist in determining the extent of child abuse within the organization. I want to make a point. All of the reforms, policies, procedures, training that I was able to bring to scouting was brought by non-scouting independent experts. A couple of them are up here with me today, but there are numerous of others out there, and they know who they are, and thank you very much for all that you have done to help me make this organization safer. Number 5, Scouts must create an independent, non-scouting task force to address youth sexual abuse. Number 6, Scouts employees and volunteers must be required to have reoccurring background and reference checks. Number 7, unscreened adults must not be allowed to access Scouts in program activities, especially tenting, camping, and overnight. Number 8, Scouting must hire a full-time child protection director, non-scouter, with real experience, a real expert, knowledgeable with expertise in the prevention, recognition, and response, and the other issues that are present in working within a youth serving organization. Number 9, Scouting executive leadership must immediately release all secret internal records, reports, findings held secret by Scouts. And I want you to know that many of these reports and findings were kept secret from me while I was there, and I'm the one that was responsible for keeping youth safe in the organization. Number 10, survivors must be included at the National Executive Board level on all decisions made. This includes inclusion of survivors on advisory boards, task forces, and within any and all departments, committees, study groups, task forces, whatever term or phrase that has anything to do with child and adolescent programming, especially as it relates to safety and keeping kids safe from sexual abuse. And this goes all the way to local councils, to include obviously the national level and all paid positions. Each of you survivors deserves a voice in the future of Scouting to keep it safe. Number 11, Congress shall maintain a biannual oversight of these and all recommended reforms under this revised charter. This is not a complete list. It is, however, a very good start. America needs the ideal of the Boy Scouts of America, or Scouts BSA. It really does. Plain and simple. Every kid in America should participate in Scouting. This call to action is not meant to end Scouting. Anybody who knows me, you Scouters that are out there, if you know me, you know that's not what this is about. We must instead create the independent accountability and oversight that is necessary for a safer Scouting program right now. The organization as it now stands fails to meet this ideal. It fails our nation, it fails our families, it fails every Scout in the program.
Michael Johnson, you just set forth in your call to action 11 points.
Yes, sir.
You also sent a letter to Congress.
Yes, sir.
And you really outlined for Congress, and it is Congress, the Congress of the United States of America, that chartered this organization over a century ago.
Yes.
And your call to them is a call to action. Kids are not safe.
I don't know another route to get this issue addressed with this organization.
And this is your letter to them.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
No, my pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Joelle Casteix is here with us, and I'll introduce each of the folks with whom we have the privilege to assemble today and hear this painful truth and this call to action. Joelle Casteix is a survivor advocate. She has also been and is on the board of the Zero Abuse Project, a nonprofit devoted to the protection of children through education, through training, and through action. And Joelle Casteix, as a member of that board, recently installed Michael Johnson as a member of the board. Joelle Casteix, correct?
Correct.
Joelle Casteix, what say you?
Again, my name is Joelle Casteix. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse, and I'm a founding board member of the Zero Abuse Project. But I can't help but think my most important role here is the role that I play every day, and that is as a mother of a 15-year-old son, as a parent who watches her son and other boys as they get involved in activities such as the Scouts. Every parent who is listening to Michael Johnson's brave, brave words needs to take to heart. Scouting is not safe. Every parent who has said to me, "Oh, Joelle, that's not our troop. Oh, Joelle, that's not our council. Oh, Joelle, that's not our organization," I'm here to tell you, it is your troop, it is your council, and it is your organization. And as a survivor of sexual abuse who's worked for decades with survivors from the Scouts, I want to tell you how amazingly proud I am of you and the hard work you have done to shine light on the horrible crimes that have taken place within the organization. I'm extraordinarily proud of Michael and what he's been able to do here today to give voice to every single survivor who felt like no one in the executive leadership of the Boy Scouts listened or cared. And finally, on behalf of the Zero Abuse Project, it is our mission to stop the cycle of child sexual abuse. It is our mission to take immediate action to ensure that what happened to people like me doesn't happen to another child. And one of the major ways this happens is when brave whistleblowers like Michael stand up and do the right thing. Because when we were getting ready for this, he told me, "Oh, Joelle, I swore to protect in my job, I swore to protect the Boy Scouts of America." And when he said that, he didn't mean the executive leadership. He meant every single boy, now girl, in Scouts BSA.
Thank you, Joelle. Victor Vieth has been a giant and a powerful voice in education, training, and particularly in child protection for decades. Formerly the leader of the National Child Protection Training Center, and more recently now the director of training, education, and child protection and research for the Zero Abuse Project. And Victor Vieth, having been in this field as a trainer, as an educator, as a researcher, and as an advocate, what say you to what Michael Johnson has shared with you and us here today?
I've been in child protection for 33 years. I was a prosecutor in Minnesota for a decade. I then went to the DC area here, worked with the National District Attorneys Association for 10 years, 8 of the 10 years directing their National Center for Prosecution of Child Abuse. I then went home to Minnesota under a federal grant, worked with my alma mater to begin to reform undergraduate and graduate training of future child protection professionals, an initiative that eventually merged into the Zero Abuse Project. I've also done a lot of work with youth serving organizations. United States Olympics, USA Swimming retained me to assess the history of sexual abuse in that organization, and we proposed reforms that have moved forward in that regard. I've known Mike Johnson for a very long time. We are old friends, and I was so excited when the Boy Scouts hired him as their National Child Protection Youth Director. I thought this was pioneering. To my knowledge, no youth serving organization had ever hired a true child abuse expert. In fact, I had often said that one of the primary challenges of YSOs is that they rely on insurance companies and law firms to develop their child protection policies and not true child abuse experts. It was a good day for children when they hired Mike Johnson. And Mike right away went to work, and he called me, he called other national experts, he formed an advisory committee, and he said, we're going to get that right. And we did do a lot of really good things under Mike Johnson's leadership. Unfortunately, Mike isn't there anymore, and they don't have a child protection director with true child abuse experience. And as Mike pointed out, there's a whole lot of work left to be done. I just want to emphasize a couple of things Mike said. Why is it that Boy Scouts might be a high-risk organization more than other institutions? First, we know from research that men are more likely to be pedophiles than women. Don't get me wrong, there are female sex offenders, perhaps more than we thought of in the past. But we know that those who would meet the diagnostic criteria for pedophilia are much more likely to be men than women. For example, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association says pedophiles among the male population may be as high as 5%, but it's minuscule among women. Well, if you're going to start an organization of men overseeing boys, you know going into it you're going to have a higher percentage of pedophiles than you would otherwise. If you look beyond pedophilia, which is a diagnosable condition of intense sexual urges for children, and look beyond it to the population, do you have any sexual interest in children? There too, it comes up that more men are sexually interested than children than women. One study of the general population, 9.8% of the men said they had some sexual interest in children, but it was only 4.2% of women. That's a dynamic we know from research that needs to be taken into account. Second, we know from research and experience that sexual predators, those who accumulate large amounts of victims, are much more likely to be men than women. There's also some evidence that predators who primarily target boys will accumulate larger numbers than those who target girls. One study, the predators in that study who focused exclusively on girls averaged about 19 before they were caught. Those who targeted boys were averaging over 150. Which leads to the third risk factor. There are unique vulnerabilities for boys. We know from research that although both boys and girls delay their disclosure for a long period of time, one study found that 58% of children delay disclosing until they are adults. We also know from the research that generally speaking, boys delay longer than girls, with one study finding the average delay was 20 years. Now let me make this clear. That's not 20 years till you call the police. That's 20 years until you tell another living human being. And there are unique factors with boys that predators take advantage of. In our society, if you're a boy, you're supposed to be tough, you're supposed to be strong, and that is a value that perhaps unwittingly is part of the scouting movement, and a predator can take advantage of that. If you talk about it, people will think of you as weak or sissy or something else. And that's a real dynamic you need to take into account when you develop policies for scouting. Fourth, there is evidence that many offenders find religious organizations easier to operate in than secular institutions. For example, a 2006 study found that sex offenders growing up in a religious community and who stayed within that tradition, they were able to accumulate more victims, younger victims, and get away with it for a longer period of time. I'm not opposed to religion. My faith means a great deal to me. That's not what we're talking about. But we have to be aware of that dynamic. So if you are a religious organization like Scouting and you're partnering with religious organizations, you have to take into account those two factors when you are developing your policies. Fifth, Mike mentioned youth-on-youth sexual abuse, and half of the cases in Scouting fall into that category. Right now, based on our current understanding, most youth-on-youth is perpetrated by boys. Over 90% of those offenders we catch engaged in youth-on-youth activity are boys. Well, that's just a major challenge for an organization of men and boys. We also know that our understanding of pedophilia manifests in adolescence and teenage years, and so that's another factor that needs to be taken into account as well. The Persian poet Rumi said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Mike, you were the light for Scouts. You entered Scouts. You were shining a light in the darkness. You were doing really, really great things, and now we're going in another direction. If Scouting is truly going to get a handle on sexual abuse, it must employ child abuse experts like Mike Johnson, and they must consult with other true experts and adopt policies that are as closely aligned as possible to what we know from research is best practice, and continue to adapt as more and better research comes down the field.
Thank you, Mr. Victor Vieth. We must act now, and there's so much work to be done. I'd like to introduce Jeff Dion. Jeff Dion, formerly with the National Center for Crime Victims, is now the CEO of the Zero Abuse Project. He is also a survivor. He's a survivor of sexual abuse in Scouting. And as active as he's been in child protection, he has not, until now, shared the details of his experience and the abuse that he had and experienced in Boy Scouts of America. Jeff Dion.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm Jeff Dion. I'm an Eagle Scout from Troop 409 in Miramar, Florida. And in April of 1983, I was 15 years old, a new and enthusiastic member of the Order of the Arrow, a secretive camping honor society in Boy Scouts. And I rode on a bus for 5 hours to Camp Shands in Gainesville, Florida, to attend a weekend Order of the Arrow section conference without any direct adult supervision. And I felt so grown up. I remember before I went that I felt like I was going on a business trip, because I was going alone, and I wasn't just going camping, I was going to a conference. I was prepared. I was 15, I was a first-class scout about to reach the rank of star, and I was an accomplished camper. I had this. But a torrential rainstorm on Friday night flooded my tent and soaked my sleeping bag. It was the only time in my life I ever actually had to abandon my tent in the middle of the night. And I sought refuge in a nearby camp shelter that didn't have any walls. And I was cold and wet and waited there with some other boys who'd also been washed out of their tents as we waited for hours for the sun to come up. And I was talking about it the next day when an adult from my council named Bill Maitre, whom I didn't really know, told me that he had an extra sleeping bag and I could stay in his tent that night. And that was when he sexually abused me. I didn't disclose the abuse to anyone. I was more than willing to buy into the culture of silence because I knew that speaking out could jeopardize my chances of making Eagle. And that was too important. A few years later, when I heard that he had been arrested for abusing boys in his troop, I didn't speak out, because I told myself that he was no longer a danger to other scouts. And even after dedicating my career to helping victims and protecting children from abuse, I still did not speak about being sexually abused in Scouting because I was ashamed. And I still somehow blamed myself. So I stayed quiet until now. I loved Scouting. It was the source of my fondest memories. And I passed those skills on to my own children and sang those same songs around the campfire with them. I believe in Scouting because America needs an institution to teach its young people leadership and citizenship and values and outdoor skills. And now that Scouting is open to all, every child that wants to participate needs to be able to do so safely. This book taught me that Scouting didn't expect me to be a perfect boy, but it asked me to do my best. It's never too late to do my best. And that's why I'm here today. I hope that by speaking out, I can be helpful to parents by reminding them that safety is paramount. I hope that by speaking out, I can be kind to other Scouting survivors by letting them know you're not alone. And I hope that I can convince current Scouts to be brave enough not to keep any secrets and to keep telling trusted adults until they listen and act. The Boy Scouts gave me this merit badge for safety, but they never warned me of the dangers that I faced from some Scout leaders. All I want is for Scouting to actually live up to the ideals that they try to instill in kids. And none of us can rest until Scouting is safe for everyone.
The offender, the leader in Scouting that violated this then child, Bill Maitre, there's a file on him and thousands of others like him. And it's held and it's housed by the Boy Scouts of America at headquarters. And those files and the thousands of those files of those offenders who they removed as ineligible volunteers are held in what the Boy Scouts of America call the perversion files. And they hold them in secrecy at headquarters to this day. Michael Johnson's and everybody's call to action here is to release all the perversion files, all the ineligible volunteer files, and all the identities of all the adults known only to the Boy Scouts at national headquarters. And released into the community, although removed from Boy Scouts, at least some of them, are released into the community and to the unwary. The peril is real and the peril is grave. and the tail is in those files, the perversion files and the ineligible volunteer files. That's why Congress must act, and that's why this call to action is, among other things, is so imperative. Some of those files were released as a result of the courage of survivors bringing litigation, but there's a small fraction of those. Some of those files were released to us, and then the courts required and the Boy Scouts required that they be returned to them. And there they are held in secrecy, and there they are hidden, and therein lies part of the peril that is in real time. And so I want to introduce Bridie Farrell. Bridie, come on forward. And Bridie is a survivor advocate, and she's also the founder of America Loves Kids. And so, Bridie, what say you?
Hi, everyone. As Jess said, my name is Bridie Farrell. I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse as well, and the founder of America Loves Kids, a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to ending child abuse against children. I think what is so important for us to take away today is that it has taken years and years for so many survivors to come forward and share their story. There are many reasons why we don't come forward and share our story, but the value in that. Having Michael Johnson come up and say he was in the organization and he was supposed to oversee it and still was barred from taking action, I think really illuminates the problem and the challenges that we're up against. I came forward with my story in 2013. The Olympic Committee did basically nothing, right? We're finally seeing congressional testimony where they're being held more accountable and the public's learning about it. It's opening up a dialogue. Well, we need that in every organization. And we see child sexual abuse in any youth-serving organization, whether it's in a church, in Boy Scouts, or in the best sport, speed skating. No matter where it is, it happens. And none of this is anti-Scouts, anti-church, or anti-sport. It's anti-crime. And that's the purpose of this. I frequently say if I'm lucky enough to have kids, I would put them in speed skating or gymnastics or these other organizations because of what Jeff Dion said, of the many, many favorable memories that happened during this time in all of our lives. That doesn't mean that those who were offenders shouldn't be held accountable. So I stand with these folks today saying, America, we need to do more. We need to do more for people who have been through harm and to help that many people heal, as well as protecting the kids of tomorrow.
Thank you, Bridie Farrell. To all the survivors of abuse and scouting and all the survivors who are now sharing their secret and having a chance to take action. In the case of the Boy Scouts of America, they sought refuge and protection from scrutiny and forced disclosure by the survivors and in the courts by going into Chapter 11, reorganization or bankruptcy, as it's called. And there they have gotten refuge. And there they are now protected from being forced to disclose not only the files, not only the identity of the offenders, but all the dangerous practices they've chosen to continue to employ. They feel safe there. But kids aren't safe in Boy Scouts of America. But they're safe in Chapter 11 from scrutiny, by the survivors, by the experts, and by the public. In their reorganization, there are over 82,000 claims that have been made by survivors of sexual abuse. 82,000. Those are just those that were able to come forward. And did come forward within a short period of time given them. It begs the question, how many are being abused right now, and how many have been that have never been able to share that secret, much less bring a claim. It's horrifying. And so to each survivor who has the courage and finds a way to share his or her secret, and is given the chance under the law, as the statutes of limitations are opening up across this country, to take action, to stand up for yourself and your own truth, and to do something to protect other kids, we express deep gratitude. You are the heroes. You are the heroes. And to you survivors, you are the heroes. All of you, and every time you speak, and every time you act, more truth is known, and more peril revealed. And so we express to you, and on your shoulders, we all stand here today in this call to action and this fierce urgency of now in this peril before us, in gratitude for your courage and your bravery. And to those 9 survivors on this creditors committee in this bankruptcy who have devoted not hundreds of hours, thousands of hours to trying to get the Boy Scouts to do the right thing, and nothing but pushback, the same way Johnson got the pushback. Denial, deceit, hiding, and getting refuge in the bankruptcy court. It's time. It's time for the truth. It's time for Congress, who chartered this organization, to revise the charter and demand and require and investigate, and then recharter it if they deserve it. And so, it's time for truth, armed with the courage of so many survivors who stand with us today, but particularly those that have come forward, and an invitation to know that it's time for the truth to be known, and it's time for kids to be protected in this organization. And so to all of you, we express our deep gratitude for this chance to be a part of this journey. With that, we'll take questions. Mike, why don't you stand up here?
Yes.
At what stage, when did you decide to come to whistleblower, step up?
You know, I don't.
The question is, when did you decide to kind of blow the whistle and to expose this truth?
I did not think of myself as a whistleblower. I went to the Boy Scouts of America with the best intentions, that the organization was sincere about making the changes to keep kids safe. In fact, there are a lot of people there that believe that, both volunteers and staff. And we made some great changes. And it seemed like every 2 steps forward, there was 1 step back. And then toward my last 3-4 years, it was steps backwards. And all of a sudden, I wasn't able to make the changes that were needed. And there were excuses and omissions. And I know had not only brought quality expert information, but made available to the organization literally the top experts in the nation. And the organization's always had access to the top experts in the nation. And then I started slowly to learn that these other experts had already explained a lot of these issues to Boy Scouts that they chose not to listen to. So then I began to realize there was some information that was being held from me. People were having to sign NDAs and were being paid on the side and things like this. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. That's not what I understood when I was going there. I felt naively that I could make change within the organization. And there were some successes. But it wasn't nearly enough when you evaluate the organization against what a high-risk organization is. And that's not just a thing. It is, a couple of words. It is a set of dynamics that allows child molesters, pedophiles, sexual deviants to have access to kids. And it's inherent within the organization that requires major change. And so I started having those discussions, and I was rebuffed. And then I began to stand on people's tables and desks, and I was rebuffed. And then I started writing memos, and I was rebuffed. And then I would start talking to executive level people. And everything I'm doing is at the highest level of Boy Scouts. It's not down here. And what was amazing, how many volunteers and other national staff were saying, go, Mike, go. But I look back and they're not necessarily there, nothing against them. It's my position. So, sir, it's my answer. It wasn't a one-time thing. It was just wore me down.
What was your reaction when you found out that the Boy Scouts held these so-called conversion farms?
There's a lot around the perversion files. There's an argument, a wonderful argument, that it's an excellent way of screening for sexual abusers within the organization. However, there's so much more that could be done with those files to keep Scouts safe. We know in the field, as Victor did an excellent job of talking, we know that a small number of sex offenders, especially child molesters, commit a vast majority of the offenses, both within this organization or any youth serving organization, as well as others. There needs to be a whole, completely review of what that is by real experts. And when I say real experts, I mean real experts. There are people out there opining on things that don't know what the heck they're talking about.
And Michael Johnson, you know they're holding those files and they're hiding those secrets as we speak. And you knew that then, and you urged disclosure of that information to protect kids. They refused, right?
Yes.
To the question, why are you coming forward now? Why now? This is 10 months after you were pushed out of there. And what made you appear with us today? Why now, Michael Johnson?
The answer to that is very simple. My first concern is myself and my family before me, and the fear of litigation, of being pulled into depositions and lawsuits, because it was pretty clear the Boy Scouts wanted me to sign an NDA or non-disparagement agreement. I had my attorney contact them and say, I'm not going to disparage, by my definition of disparage, the organization. I love the organization. I just want it to do right. But don't try to tell me not when and where I can tell the truth. I'll tell you, I'm fed up with people telling me in that organization what to say, how to say it, and what to believe. They pushed back that the non-disparagement meant any discussion with anybody unless I'm subpoenaed, and that doesn't sit right with me. I didn't spend 40 years of my life dedicated to listening to children talk about being sexually abused and doing the hard work of getting perpetrators to confess so I could put them in prison, to have anybody tell me what I can say or not say.
So Michael Johnson, you expressed that you would be afraid for your family or attacked or retaliated if you actually spoke up and told the truth.
Yeah, yes.
Which you did today.
Yes.
What made you call me?
Because you're not afraid of the Boy Scouts of America, to be honest with you. Because you have an organization that you have funded, that I know a lot of the people that work for it, that's seeking to end child sexual abuse. That means something, not just hashtagging and liking. I'm talking about actually training professionals, speaking with youth serving organizations, to include churches and other organizations that are especially high risk, that you've actually put money and effort into doing that. And I knew this was way bigger than me, that it was going to take something like this, and I believe that you could make it happen.
Thank you for making that call and making this call to action here today. Any other questions?
I just want to say one more comment. I mean, you asked why he blew the whistle at this time, and people ask us that all the time. Why are you speaking up now? When you ask survivors why they speak up, it's not for us, but rather you see a child and that you're motivated for them and to protect them. What we're seeing, though, across the country is more and more survivors standing up, and that means a lot. and we're building community, and it's huge, and it helps with every aspect of this healing process. What we're also seeing is people speaking out against child sexual abuse, not because it happened to them, but because they know it's wrong, and that they know it's the right thing to do to stand up and just protect other humans. And so while we have to rely on brave whistleblowers like Michael today in this situation and in so many other situations to come forward the last couple weeks and talk about what's really going on out there, I encourage all survivors to pick up the phone and call us, talk to someone, but also everybody out there that just cares about the kid next door, right? That's what we're about. You know, this country is built on, we're good, we're great, but we are moving towards a more perfect union. And that's what we all have to be in this thing together. Don't kill the Scouts, don't kill the sports, but it's the idea of us coming together and rebuilding what these organizations were actually formed to do. So I thank all the lawyers across the country that have helped survivors come forward. I thank all my brother and sister survivors. I thank those that keep coming out on a daily basis, and I know how hard that is. And now I thank the people that are speaking out just because it's the right thing to do.
It's time. There's a problem in the Boy Scouts of America, and you management and you leadership are it. It's time. Thank you to all the survivors who have come forward and those who have shared this moment in time with us, because it's time for action. And it's time for the kids to be safer than they are right now. And the problem is in real time, right now, in Scouts BSA. Thank you all.